But everyone, please join me in giving a huge, warm round of applause to Aarti for presenting on this topic today. I'm so excited to be welcoming Aarti to the spotlight. Aarti and I were both chiefs of staff at the same time. We were both a part of OnDeck's inaugural Chief of Staff Fellowship. So we go back years now, it seems like, and everybody knows that chief of staff time is like dog years. It's like 7 years to 1 year. So it feels like we've been, in the trenches together for a while. And Aarti is a 2-time chief of staff, so she definitely knows what she's talking about. She's set up many a rhythm of business, and so she was the perfect person to bring to talk about this topic. So excited to welcome her here with us today, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Aarti, and please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clara, and thank you everyone for having me. It is wonderful to be here. And I'm excited to talk about this topic. I think this is something that a term people say a lot, but we don't really talk about it a lot. And so I'm excited to dig into it and have this be a collaborative discussion. And I just, again, want to just say thank you to Clara and the Ask a Chief of Staff community for having me be part of it. So kudos to you. So jumping in, a few weeks ago, I asked many of you what would be useful for this session, and many of you responded. So thank you to that. And I hope we're going to get to most of that. If not all of the pre-asked questions in the content I'll be covering today. We're also going to have time at the end for Q&A, where I'd love to open up a dialogue around, rhythm of business and things you're hearing and things that are coming up for you. There are many chiefs of staff in this room that have collective knowledge of rhythm of business. I am one of many of you. So if there's perspectives you want to share, I welcome that. Also, if you have questions you want to ask, definitely throw them into the chat and I'll periodically stop and answer those as they come. And then if you also just want to add any color commentary, you're like, hey, actually, this is how we do it at my org, or this is like an interesting anecdote, definitely throw that in. And it's nice to have a discussion in the chat as well. So before we get started, I love to just introduce myself, who I am. Clara did a wonderful introduction. I'm just going to go a little bit deeper. So my name is Aarti Bhatnagar. And like Clara mentioned, I have been a chief of staff twice. First at change.org for a product development team, and then most recently at Guild Education for the co-founder, and he then became the chief product officer. And since then, I've launched an executive coaching business where I serve specifically current and aspiring chiefs of staff as their executive coach. And really my mission is to empower my clients to take on this role with confidence, assessing their inner capacity to solve problems with creativity, clarity, and courage. And for current chiefs of staff, I act as my clients, I like to call it my client's second brain and thought partner, really supporting them as they're navigating the ups and downs of being a chief of staff. And for aspiring chiefs of staff, I like to serve as a cheat sheet, helping my clients really understand all they need to know about landing their next role as chief of staff. So some fun facts about me outside of coaching, and I know we like to do fun facts in this community. I am a singer and songwriter and really love making music with my friends, and recently made some music this summer, which I'm really excited about. Second fun fact is during the height of COVID, my then boyfriend, now husband, and I moved into a commune where we lived with 14 strangers at the time. Now they're essentially family. And I am a Bay Area native. I'm currently calling in from Oakland, California. So if you want to chat more about coaching, communes, or music, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to chat. All right, let's get to the good stuff. So as mentioned earlier, I've really tailored this session to answer the questions that many of you asked when I was posing this question in a Slack. So I'm hoping we highlight a lot of that, as well as just, I brought up some things that I thought were interesting or relevant. So we're going to cover the following. What is a rhythm of business, aka RoB, and why is it important? What are different RoB models? I know this one came up in particular across different stage of company. The third one is going to be, what's the role of a chief of staff in the RoB process? And then the fourth is, what are best practices for setting up and maintaining a strong rhythm of business? I'm just going to check the chat. Okay, great. Awesome. Bay Area represent. Love to see that. Okay, so let's just jump right into what is a rhythm of business. So while there isn't, and I really tried to Google like official term for this official definition for this term, there isn't an official one. This is one of those terms that comes out in business and people start using it, and it catches fire and everyone starts using it. The way that I like to describe it, a rhythm of business, is really in that music sense. Rhythm is a musical word, so I'm going to describe it in the music sense. A rhythm of business is the operating cadence of a business that keeps the musicians, aka the company, on beat and in harmony. So it's really kind of like that beats per minute. If any of you are musicians, you'll understand this. It's really that rhythm that then keeps the rest of the musicians on beat and in harmony as music is being made. And that concept can translate to business. It's really that operating cadence that keeps a company in harmony. And it's really the ebb and flow of everything from strategic planning by senior leaders all the way down to weekly team meetings held by team leaders. So it can span a lot of different things. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of color on what a rhythm of business, what can be part of a rhythm of business. And the short answer is that it's the aspects of the business that are most critical to your leadership team and key stakeholders. And I've listed a few examples of things that are often in rhythm of businesses, but again, it really can be specific to you and the department and what you're working on. But the things that I think I've seen most often are the annual strategic planning process. You want to lay that out very clearly. You want to have quarterly planning and reviews laid out very clearly on a kind of timeline. You want to make sure you're aware of when board meetings are happening. You want to be aware of monthly town halls. You want to have weekly update meetings, performance review cycles, anytime on-sites are going to happen. Those are the types of things that often come up. And when I was thinking about sort of the most common rhythms of businesses, these 4 categories here on the left side of the screen you see popped up for me. And so I think I bucket them into 4 as annual planning, quarterly planning, department operations, and HR administration. So a lot of the tasks you'll most commonly see can bucket into those 4 areas. And we'll cover those 4 areas in more detail in a few slides as well. Okay. So before we jump into the different types of rhythm of businesses and going into more detail about the role of a chief of staff in the rhythm of business, I want to just take a moment to talk about why is this even important, and why is it important to establish this early. So the first reason is proactive planning. So establishing a strong rhythm of business early allows really you as chief of staff to proactively plan the year ahead. A rhythm of business is not the what, but is how the company will execute to meet the company's sort of annual goals and strategic plans. And so setting a rhythm of business early will allow for you to both plan ahead as well as foresee potential roadblocks or issues that could impact execution of the strategy. So it's really the plan of the how is how I think of a rhythm of business. Of course, there are goals that your leadership team with you in mind are going to set around what do you want to achieve this year, X number of revenue, X number of new users, whatever it might be. The rhythm of business is that plan, it's that how plan that's going to allow you to get to those metrics in an organized, consistent fashion without things getting mucky along the way. All right. The next reason I think it's really important to establish a strong rhythm of business is intentional communication. So as chief of staff, it's often your job to communicate key priorities and updates to the company. And having a rhythm of business preset gives you the ability to plan communications intentionally, which will create understanding amongst staff. And that's really important. The entire essence of communication is to create understanding. And so if you do this well, you're going to create understanding, and then you're also going to reduce inconsistent communications about competing team priorities. And the reason why I'm raising this inconsistent communications is because I've seen this happen. I've seen, sadly, poor comms where a robust people team is like, hey, I need you guys to fill out these engagement surveys, and they're due by the end of this week. And then also business operations is asking teams to fill out, certain strategic planning or OKR needs the same week. And it's like, all of a sudden staff is like, what the hell? This is so much information. I'm feeling so overloaded, so overworked. It feels like people at the top are not talking to each other, and like, this is chaos. And so having a strong rhythm of business allows for you to, again, have that intentional communication that is going to keep staff calm. It's going to make sure everyone is aligned and understand what's going on. Which gets me nicely to my next point, which is departmental alignment. And I think this is so critical, and probably like one of the biggest reasons to have a strong rhythm of business is to make sure that, the rhythm of business is really agreed upon by all departments, which will break down those department silos and create that alignment and clarity, which will also, again, allow for better communication, just like a calmer environment amongst staff. And, this is bringing up, there's different types of, department elements within companies. Bigger companies, the last company I came from was a Series F, and there were about 1,500 people, and there were like way too many departments. And it was just like, you needed something like this in order for people to understand what is being communicated to specific audiences and why. And then finally, a rhythm of business allows for what I'm calling empowerment through predictability. So it won't just be, your senior leaders and department heads that are using this rhythm of business, but even your line managers and your team leads are going to use this to really understand what's expected of them and by when. And then that, therefore, if they know their expectations, it then gives them the freedom to really explore, experiment, and dig in with their teams without interruption. The worst thing is that a team is going deep on whatever work they're doing. Let's say it's a product team and they're going deep on, their sprints. And all of a sudden some biz ops person or people team person is like, hey, I need you to deliver this for me in 2 weeks. And they're like, what? We've been going deep on the work we're doing. So having this allows for team leads and department, and line managers even to have that understanding, and allows them to do the work that they need to do well. And then the last thing I'll also say is, I didn't put this on the slide, but having a strong rhythm of business just makes you look good as chief of staff. It's just a fact. Leaders are often visionaries. They live in the clouds. They're thinking about the strategy. They're thinking about, what do we need to get our next series round, or what do we need to get to hit the next milestone, or the new business development opportunity we have. And they're not often thinking in the weeds on operations and how this is going to get done. So having a clean and well thought out plan is really this added value to your principal and your executive team. And they're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is why I had as chief of staff. Like, this is exactly what I need them to do, is like think intentionally about, how we're going to do this work while I'm swimming in the clouds and thinking about what's next. Great. I'm just checking the chat to see if anything's coming up. And again, if you have any questions, or if you even want to just jump, if you want to raise your hand, although I'm not doing the best job monitoring, if you want to raise your hand and add something, I welcome that. So I want this to be a collaborative conversation. All right. So this next section is around, no, fully agree, particularly the visionary. Awesome, thanks. First, I thought you were going to disagree with me. I was like, let's have a dialogue, Karsten. But awesome, I'm glad you fully agree. So this next slide, I think, was probably the most requested slide. I know many of you are interested in understanding how rhythm of business differ across different types of companies. So what I'm doing here is providing my take on how rhythms of business differ amongst early stage and mature stage companies. Like I mentioned, I was most recently at a Series F company, which is definitely on the more mature stage side. So I appreciate my buddy, Andrew, I'm not sure if he's on, Andrew Marita, who jumped on a call with me earlier or last week to give me his perspective on early stage. And so it was really nice to validate some of that thinking with him. And then, like I said earlier, as I'm mentioning and sharing the difference between early and mature stage, definitely feel free to provide your own perspective. You all come from specific types of companies, so provide your own perspective on what you're seeing. So the first bucket I want to talk about is annual planning, like I mentioned earlier, and that includes activities like headcount reviews and planning. It includes budget reviews, thinking about, so how much budget are you going to have next year? How much did you use this year? Headcount is, how many people stayed at the company? How many people do you want to continue to hire? And then also includes, of course, strategic goals for the year. So really, what do you want to focus on as a company the next year or the next several years? So at early stage companies, this is often done by leaders who make the decisions and then communicate that out to staff, providing updates as things change. Oftentimes, you may have an idea of what could work at an early stage company, and then things might change. Maybe there's a new client that comes in, so you want to provide that update quite quickly, and that's often done by a smaller leadership team. Now, at a mature stage company, annual planning is a cross-department effort that is conducted over several weeks, oftentimes towards the end of the year. And it's like quite an intensive process for department leaders and folks that need to be in those, weekly planning sessions where they need to provide a lot of data, a lot of information about how things have been going. And that's like their focus for the last few weeks of the year. And then it's supplemented with a very robust communication strategy and rollout plan to the company. So usually there's like chief of staff with other, maybe even communications leaders, business operations that are like working hand in hand to roll out a communications plan to the company once a strategy has been set. So that's annual planning and how it differs. Then there's quarterly planning, which includes quarterly business reviews and the establishment of OKRs. I'm sure many of us are familiar with quarterly business reviews and OKRs, objectives and key results for the next quarter. And for an early stage company, this is mostly conducted at the company level with the intention to get to the department level. And so if an early stage company, kind of has operations and departments that need to kind of detail that out, departments will do it, but generally it's done at just even the company level. And at mature companies, quarterly planning is a set process that is conducted at the company, department, and often even at the individual level. So mature stage companies will ask their employees even to do reflection on how was your last quarter and what are your own personal and professional goals for the coming quarter, in addition to your department, in addition to the company. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is department operations. So department operations consist of things like your team all hands, your maybe your leader team meeting. I've worked on product teams, so there's always the leaders of product coming together on a weekly basis. There's team on-sites you want to do. So there's just like the department needs. What are the things that keep your department running week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter? And for an early stage company, these operations will likely be custom to the department. So it's going to be your marketing team is going to have very focused specific operations that they do, and product and engineering, et cetera. For a mature stage company, what I've noticed is that operations will definitely have their customizations, but actually you'll start to see that they're more similar than different. So they'll have different flavors and colors on how they do things, but generally departments are doing like the same buckets of work, but they'll have their own way of doing it. And then also at more mature stage companies, there will be set deliverables and communication asks and milestones that are being asked of by the central business. So again, that central business will be asking departments, hey, can you make sure you're communicating these things out by a certain time? Can you make sure you guys are hitting these milestones? We're in planning season. Make sure you're communicating about performance reviews coming up. So that is often what's happening at the mature stage for department needs. And then the last is HR administration, which includes things like performance reviews and compliance trainings, lots more, but those are, some of the bigger ones. And at early stage companies, this is often 1 to 3 people, operations and administrators leading the process and making requests of staff, like really saying like, hey, you need to get this done. It's a smaller sort of people team, if you will. And at mature stage companies, like the last company I was at, our people team was the people team staff was 100 people. There were 100 people on the people team. And you can imagine it was very robust, and they're driving various initiatives and requiring staff participation in a lot of different ways by certain dates. So all in all, early stage companies, I'd say, their rhythm of business is more loose and flexible, and mature stage companies definitely have more robust and structured rhythm of businesses. That all being said, though, my advice would be that, and Andrew and I were chatting about this, is that really all company rhythm of businesses emulate those of mature stage companies. So really trying to move the needle on like, how can we have a bit more process? And while I know process, that word in particular, can be annoying and a bit burdensome, especially for like early stage companies and founders that are trying to move quickly, it's really important as chief of staff in particular to move the mindset of your leaders and staff. Because again, process and focusing on the how is what will lead to ultimate success. And so it's really your job as chief of staff to be like, great, I know we have all these ideas, but like, we should really try to set better process. And it goes back to like, why are we even talking about rhythm of business, and why is it important to set rhythm of businesses in the first place? Just checking the chat again. Some enterprise views, publicly listed companies' rhythms are driven by required disclosure deadlines. Absolutely. Same for businesses in highly regulated industries, and for businesses that are vendors to public regulated companies, and for companies with board members that are cross-pollinating directors. Board meeting season is a driver. Yep. So board nominating cadence is a sleeper input too. Absolutely. Board prep and board meeting is absolutely something that is in here. It's not included in one of these 4, but like absolutely is a big chunk of work that is a regular cadence that happens. Yes, Lee, thank you for adding that. And that's the kind of feedback I love to see in these types of sessions. So thank you.
Are we allowed to come off mute? And
yes, please.
So going back to this, one, thank you. This is really helpful. So I have a company right now, chief of staff of a company who's in an early stage and looking to move to a more mature stage as we advance the next phase of our work. Can you talk a little bit more about the mindset shifts and like what practices that I should, like what any best practices or things that I should keep in mind as I try to shift the mindset here?
Yeah. I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit, and I can talk about it earlier now, but it's really the advice I want to give on like, as chief of staff, what can you do? And Andrew again and I were talking about this, is culture. So it's like, what culture do you want to be as a company? So it's almost like you want to, like, my advice to you would be, have a conversation with your leadership team and say like, great, the best companies clearly have very specific kinds of cultures, right? So like Amazon is a memos only culture. Andrew was mentioning that Ring has a very militant type of, like a military founders that were working on it. So it's like a military culture. Google has like OKRs came from the Google leadership team. And so they really thrive well on that type of cadence. And not every company uses OKRs, most do. And so you can kind of say like, what kind of company do we want to be and what kind of culture do we want to set? And so I think it's kind of like having that culture conversation, which can then drive some of that mindset shift. Because if you have that culture conversation, it then is like, well, what do we need to do in order to actually make that a reality? We need to probably have some prioritization meetings. We probably need to have some more like regular cadences of meetings. And I would also, the last thing I'll also add is like, culture can also be like, do we want to be a more transparent, culture to our team? Rhythm of business is a big part of it, is it provides transparency, right? It lets staff and your teams understand like, where are we headed and where are we going? Of course, we have these goals that like we want to achieve in the next few months or maybe even the next year or two, but like what's coming up and what do we really need to know? And so it's like, also, do we want to provide a culture of transparency? Is that something that's important to us? So I'm going to keep us moving. I like the discussion happening in the chat. So rhythms of businesses are often visually shown as framework of activities. I know some people will just have their rhythm of business in their head, which is great, but I recommend putting it down on paper and making sure it is something that everyone can see. And so there's there's many ways to show rhythms of businesses and visually represent them. And I'm just going to show a few of them that I found. The most common that I've used in my past is this one, which is category centric. What you see on the left here, this is actually a people team's rhythm of business. And so you can see people team specific categories and sort of the details of those categories across the slide with initiatives with initiatives across the quarter. So you can see performance reviews at the top. That's a category that's important to the people team. When do those things happen? Company planning, OKRs happen 4 times a year. Great. HR programs, there's EEOC reporting, employee voice survey, handbook updating and signing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's important because there's going to be communications that people team is going to need to say to staff. They're going to need to let them know the handbook has been updated. You need to in DocuSign, probably validate that you've read it from a compliance perspective, right? And then there's training and connection and events. So this is a people team specific one, which you can absolutely do as a department. It doesn't need to just be at the company level. You may have company level rhythms of businesses, and then also at a department level saying, hey, this is really specific to our team. And this is a great example of that. Someone asked, what did you build this? This is just PowerPoint. So this is or Google Slides. So this is very simple. You can kind of oftentimes just steal a timeline template and then just add to it. A little bit harder to update, if you can use, and I don't have recommendations on this. I'm sure there are really smart tools that can do this in a more automated way. But I've often seen rhythms of business happen in just Google products, so Google Slides and Sheets. But if anyone else has recommendations, please share that. The next sort of rhythm of business that I've seen, another way to sort of visually represent is by focusing on the cadence. And this one is actually really cool. So at the top of the slide, you'll see activities sorted by annually, quarterly, monthly, and weekly. So it gives just another dimension to the previous slide that I mentioned. And so you can see here, they have their categories on the left, and then you can see annually, what do they need to hit, quarterly, weekly, etc. The con of this, if you will, is that most companies, I think mostly quarterly. And so bucketing it by quarters in just a category doesn't allow for you to see what's exactly happening in Q3 and what does that overlap with and parallel with, because a lot of the times you want to make sure you're able to see, great, this is happening in Q3 and these other 4 things are happening in Q3. But this is an interesting way to do it as well. And I think you can have different views just based on the audience and what resonates most with them. And ultimately, again, there's no wrong way to represent your rhythm of business visually. Again, I just think it's important to have it documented in a way that's easy to understand. And it's also key that it's very easy to find. So make sure it's accessible. Something that I would often do as chief of staff is that I would bring up the rhythm of business, so this visual representation, when I was leading our team all hands. So I would say hey, okay, great, welcome to the team all hands, do your check-in question, have a culture moment, and then say awesome, let's just take a moment to see where we're at in this year. And so what have we achieved and where are we going? And so you just pull up the rhythm of business so people can see it. And then you can, attach it to specific Slack groups or keep it in a knowledge management system and tool that works for you and your company. Awesome. I'm seeing template ideas coming through. Would you say, yes, the slides will be shared after the session. FigJam for planning. Then we use Notion for project tracking. Coda is good for automation and tracking. Notion is great. So is Miro. Yes, Miro is great. I haven't personally used Notion to do rhythm of business, but Miro I'm obsessed with and love. And I think that's a great one to also use for something like this. Awesome. And then I actually, last night I was prepping for this, and then I found this crazy one, which I actually don't think my brain would understand, but just throwing it out there as another one. This was literally a rhythm of business that's circular, and it has the dates around, and it has some things in there. Again, more power to folks that will understand this. I just thought it was cool to show. So there's, again, different ways to visually represent. Okay, great. So I want to talk about what is the role of a chief of staff in the rhythm of business process. So I would say generally across companies, a chief of staff has the same kind of role, but I did notice a difference when I was thinking about this for developing rhythms of businesses. So for early stage companies, a chief of staff is often the owner. They're the person that is kind of establishing that rhythm of business process. Samantha, thank you again for going off mute and saying, hey, we're moving to early stage. Like I can imagine you being the person that's going to be like, hey, I think we should have a rhythm of business and this is how we should do it. So you'd be the developer. For mature stage companies, especially again, a company that I was at, you're often creating the rhythm of business with key players across the business. Again, it'll be a small team, but there might be some business operations folks. You obviously need to collaborate with like the key departments and getting the data, but in developing the rhythm of business, there might be other chiefs of staff you're working with or business operations folks that you're going to be working with. And then for maintaining the rhythm of business, the chief of staff definitely plays a role. Going back to that music analogy, you're the conductor, right? You're like, there's the band, there's like the orchestra, and you are the conductor that's like, let's make sure we're like actually doing what we said we're going to do as it relates to the rhythm of business. You're that quarterback that's really going to be checking in to see if things are accurate, things are going well as it relates to the rhythm of business. And then as mentioned earlier, you're the communications lead. You're going to be communicating to staff, to even cross departments. Hey, this is what's going on. These are the things that are key, keep in mind, etc. And then the last part is I'd also mention that you're going to be the iteration lead. So you're going to be someone that's going to make sure that this rhythm of business is accurate, it's correct. You're going to be making tweaks and adjustments to the rhythm of business to really ensure it always stays relevant. Great. Yeah, just looking at the chat, the circle one would drive you crazy. Yes, also me too. And we're coming towards the end of my session here. And the last slide I want to talk about is really what are the best practices for setting up and maintaining a strong rhythm of business. And so the first thing I want to talk about is gathering milestones. So how do you do this? Like if you're, Samantha, for example, you're like, maybe I'm a place where I want to actually make this happen. How do I even think about this? So the first thing you want to do is gather milestones. So document and have conversations with key parts of your business, oftentimes HR, finance, the folks you're probably running strategic planning, so that'll be you. So thinking about, what are the key things you need to have on something like this? And what are the key aspects that you feel like are going to be important. So set those categories and then document those milestones. And then, determine the key meetings, decide on the cadences for all hands, for leadership team meetings, for on-sites. Board meetings are usually already preset, but make sure that is already in there and you're including those cadences in. Get feedback. Make sure that after you've drafted your rhythm of business, you're getting feedback from the key stakeholders across the company, whether it's your principal, go back to HR and finance and make sure they feel good about these, because maybe they're talking to each other, but they might be like unaware that, oh, wow, finance actually is doing this review season. Crap, we have this big HR initiative we're trying to do. We probably need to have a conversation about that. Like I was mentioning earlier, establish culture. I think it's really important to really decide, who do you want to be as a company? What kind of company do you want to be? And that will really help strengthen and lock in this rhythm of business. It'll be something that is just like a cultural norm. Everyone will understand that this is what we do and this is what we talk about. Start using the language of rhythm of business. What is our rhythm of business, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, there's certain kinds of cultures, the Ring culture, the Amazon culture, etc. And then the last thing I'll mention is stay agile. Like most new or even established processes, iteration is really key. So really come back to that rhythm of business often to ensure it's accurate and effective. And and I think you'll be in a good place. That's all the content I had, Clara. I'm 20 minutes early. So I welcome questions or even just a discussion. What's resonating, what's coming up for you guys?
Yeah, amazing. We will definitely get these slides from Aarti. I know there's like some good templates that people want to use as inspiration. If you do go with the circle one, please let me know. I would love to see it. But yeah, let's get some people up here, come off mute, ask your questions. I see Ella has a question here. Can you talk about getting buy-in? I feel like this is something people will be excited about at first, but then it kind of dies down during the year. So I can resonate with wholeheartedly. So Artie, why don't you take away?
Yeah, I think it's a good question around buy-in. I definitely think, again, like, your leaders, like I was mentioning, they're the visionary. They're going to be thinking about what's next. I would say, I think you want to make sure that they're aware that this is an important thing you're going to be doing. And I've actually, whenever I've done rhythm of businesses, I've actually haven't felt pushback. I've mostly felt people being like, wow, that is really smart of you to have like written all that down and to actually have like organized us in a fashion, because a rhythm of business doesn't require very much from department leads or stakeholders, right? You're just trying to essentially get their plans in a centralized place. And I think the way to think about buy-in is like, this is going to help everyone. It's going to make your initiatives more successful. It's going to make our initiatives more successful. So why don't we just like stay organized and do this in a way that is going to create more clarity and alignment amongst us? And so that's probably what I would suggest. I welcome other people's thoughts. Clara, from your perspective, do you feel like that's something you've had to do in terms of getting buy-in? Anyone else want to add any color there?
I would say the rhythm of business is often it's more a presentation of a solution than it is like, here's another thing that you need to do. I think that's kind of what we're touching on here. And Ella, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you're also asking about like, okay, now that we've established the rhythm of business, how do we make sure that everybody is like, we are going to do OKRs the first week or the last week of the quarter, or like we are going to have a town hall every quarter or something like that.
Right.
And
So I guess I can add a little more color, because what I'm experiencing sometimes, like my principal is very excited about it, and he will be like, oh, we have to have this and this is great, and we make sure that communicate it. But throughout the year, right, how do you motivate like other leaders on the team, or just make sure people are not like, oh, this is another task that we're doing to put our OKRs into Lattice, right? It has to be something that people can kind of see, like, what is their work contributing to. So I kind of feel like my question might be a little bit more around, how do you make other people in the organization excited about it? Maybe excited is not the word. Nobody's going to be like, yay, rhythm of business, but just something that people feel like is a useful tool that kind of creates clarity for them. I feel like at the top people get it, but then how do you kind of trickle that down?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one. I've seen a lot of companies get really excited about establishing OKRs, and then it works for a little bit, and then all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, OKRs, like this is the worst."
Yeah. And
like,
I don't want to be that OKR lady again.
Yeah,
right?
like, oh, the OKR ladies come in and they're asking me for things. This is really annoying. And I don't think there's necessarily a silver bullet for this. I think it's like one of those things you just need to like be trying and iterating. I think ultimately people are just like, what is the point of this? And like, how is this helping me? And so I think if you can just think about communicating to, the folks that are feeling less excited about it or energized around it, like, why is this something that'll actually make their lives better and easier and their work better and easier? And sometimes it's just like, hey, it'll get your leadership team to just shut up. It'll get them to stop being on your back. Or it might be, actually this is going to create better understanding. Like the leaders are really struggling to understand what you guys are working on. And so this is important that they like get an understanding and are actually prioritizing your initiatives and creating focus for you guys. Right. So I think it comes back to like trying to figure out like why it would actually be valuable to those stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, I know other people have their hands up and I'm jumping in, but I feel like I've held myself to a standard of like other people have to be as excited about this as I am, because I've put so much thought into it. And the reality is like, just take that expectation off yourself. Like people just often are not going to be excited about operations, and like, what can you do to create the least burden on them? And so they can focus on achieving their objectives and their OKRs and unblocking their team. And like, you can be the one that has to be a bit of like a sheepdog, like chasing them. And that's just part of being an op sometimes. Like other people are not going to be as excited about it as you are. And so like, just take that pressure off yourself to like get people excited about operations, I think, a little bit.
Totally. I know Sandy and Lee have your hands up. Sandy, I also see a comment. I'm going to ask you to jump off first. You talked about breaking it down and introducing changes incrementally. I think that's brilliant. Do you want to raise that and then maybe ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think of this is change management, right? Whenever you're introducing change, it is always, especially I've seen this in these transitions, like process, the word it kind of gets used. Oh my God, we used to just like talk to people. Now we have to fill these things. Like there is always this, especially with engineers and others, like I've seen this, but to some of the points Katie was raising, making it as easy and simple, and sometimes breaking the change instead of introducing all these different meetings. One of the major complaint I see is like, why do we have to go through these many meetings? So, and especially you also touched about culture. There are times where like just sending a pre-read, depending on the culture, it changes, but at least the things that have worked for me is planning this ahead of time, giving like little bit time so that people are not feeling pressured, especially during quarterly planning or things of that nature. The more time you have, the little bit more leeway. And one note I'll add with buy-in is it always helps to, at least for me, the things that have worked is usually there'll be engineering directors or leaders, stakeholders that will be critical for this rhythm of business to be successful. You want to start the conversations early so that I almost felt like the idea was coming from them instead of me telling like, hey, we should do this. If you make them feel that this idea is great and they will become your allies and kind of like, we should do this. It'll take time to get to that stage, but I think kind of like letting them tell you we need this is a critical step.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, Sandy, I love what you're saying around like getting people to feel like they came up with the process rather than it's like being dictated by you. And I think this is also where design thinking can be such a strong tool in your toolbox, where it's like, instead of just presenting a rhythm of business, you can say like, hey, let's develop something together. Clearly we have a problem. Clearly like things are happening, processes are getting messed up. We have communication issues. We have some alignment issues. Why don't we like all get into a room and like design something together? And actually it probably will end up being something like a rhythm of business, and you kind of have the answer in your head, but it allows people to go on that journey with you and you can guide them along that way. Lee, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add on the point about keeping people's buy-in. You have to respect everyone's rhythm of life too. And so, to take the music metaphor, I'm not going to ask my team to hit their drum during the gap. I'm not going to ask you to play your horn when no one's supposed to be playing their horn, right? If it's people's vacations and everyone takes their vacation at a certain time of year, and if there's a cultural component to that, then you have to design around that, right? If it's kids on spring break, kids going to school, and you have a lot of parents in your organization, you have to design around that. Holidays, other things. So, you could have a perfectly well-designed rhythm of business, but if it feels like it's infringing upon people's family and personal lives, they're going to prioritize their family and personal lives. And not only is the rhythm of business going to lose out, but you're also going to create some resentment toward the operating culture of the company at large. And you're going to start to see attrition, or at least get some less than favorable, employee sentiment feedback, right, about respecting time and space. And so, there's the rhythm of business and there's the rhythm of life. And those two things have to go hand in hand.
I love that. Thank you for raising that. I think that's such an important part, especially, when I was mentioning proactive planning, like, again, don't just proactively plan for the business, proactively plan for everyone's life, right? People are living their lives, and there's natural cadences of vacations and holidays and time off that should be respected. And so when you're planning the business, make sure it's really taking all of that holistically into consideration.
I think there's I don't think we touched on Lucy's question up here yet, but Lucy had a question around communicating plan changes. At such an early stage, it feels hard to plan for a whole quarter, and the sequence projects often change. How to rally the team when we need a change or acknowledge deviation from the plan. Yeah, this is definitely early stage startup problems, right?
Yeah, I think again, just coming at it with an authentic voice and saying like, hey, this is our rhythm of business today. Things will come up and we are going to have this be a living document and living process. Things will come up, changes will happen to this. And I will make sure as chief of staff that I am communicating very intentionally when those changes come up and why they've come up. And so I think you can let everyone know that, you know, ideally, like, let's say you have a rhythm of business for the next 4 weeks. Ideally that is set, you know, so people can really like plan their lives and plan things ahead, and not even just 4 weeks, you know, like a quarter at least. And then if there are changes that come up, you know, just be really intentional about like, a few things. One, I would say, make sure that the change is worth it. Because again, like Lee was mentioning, people do plan their lives around a rhythm of business depending on the things you're asking of them. So make sure it's really worth it. And it's something that is really key for the business. And then if it is worth it, communicate it, again, in a very like honest, endearing, empathetic way that is going to have people understand why this change was made. And try to make sure that as part of the leadership team, and the leadership team is going to support it and support individuals as the change is getting made, if it affects their personal lives in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you communicate change, one, being at an early stage startup, you expect things to change, right? From week to week, like you could do an entire product pivot or a company pivot or a branding pivot. And so, you know, it comes with the territory. But I think the thing about communicating change is why, right? It's not just, oh, instead of doing, you know, town halls every quarter, we're going to do them every other quarter and just leave it at that, but communicate why. Again, I can't remember who was talking about this, but making it seem like it was their idea, or using the feedback that you've received to communicate that change, I think is always very important. To frame it in a way that is, again, how does it benefit you? How is this going to make our lives easier down the road, even if that change right now feels like a hurdle? Okay, so I think we have another question here from Claire. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody else's question here. But it's about the work. When you, Claire asked, we recently started a new MBR cadence and meetings popped up like mushrooms to prepare for the MBR. The tech team is doing 8 30-minute meetings to capture info the week before the MBR, and the MBR itself created more work. How would you head that off before it becomes an issue?
I'm just trying to make sure I understand this. So new MBR cadence and meetings popped up like mushrooms to prepare for the MBR. The tech team is doing 8 30-minute meetings to capture info. Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's like, if you can get ahead of this as early as possible, that is the ideal. Sometimes you can't. But if you can kind of say like, hey, this is what's going to be required for this new MBR process. And sort of set the cadence to say like, hey, certain teams, instead of creating all of these additional cadences, like these will be the set times that will do this work. If you want to go off and do some additional pre-work yourselves, like I'm not going to stop you, go ahead, but this is what's actually, these will be like the sort of set times that we're going to be doing this planning for the MBR. So that it is a central and organized way to do the planning, rather than it being like everyone's just going ad hoc and like doing it as they want.
Yeah, I'm just gonna piggyback off of that. When you have I'm sorry if I don't know what MBR stands for.
Yeah, I realize I don't either, but I'm assuming it's some kind of
monthly business review. Is that what okay?
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Yeah, monthly business reviews. I think also creating the prep work, right? What is the homework that they need to do? Because chances are they're just like, the monthly business review is coming up. We've never done it before. So like, we need to make sure the things that we're presenting, you know, maybe it's something they're like having a meeting about branding the PowerPoint, you don't know what it is. So not only should you tell them, hey, this meeting is coming up, but this is what we expect you to present, and have that, you know, template or homework sheet or whatever it is, so that, and you can even give them a timeline, right? It's almost like doing a take home for an interview. It's like, we only expect you to spend 2 hours on this, and any more time you spend on that, like, it's not going to be a value add. And I think like setting the clear expectations there. So as a chief of staff, not only are you presenting the rhythm of business, you're like also presenting, this is the kind of prep work that I expect you to put into this. I don't expect you to have, you know, 4 hours worth of meetings to do this. And I think setting that expectation and having an example is really helpful, and can probably preempt a lot of those meetings as well.
Yeah, Claire, that's great. And I also have seen sometimes chiefs of staff or companies will also say like, great, like we're actually we're actually encouraging that everyone on Wednesday kind of cancel their meetings and everyone does the planning for this MBR or whatever it might be in this period of time. So it shows, one, it gives everyone permission to kind of say like, oh, it's time to prep for MBR, but it also shows like support and sort of commitment to ensuring that you're not kind of alone and expected to do this after hours or on the weekends. I hope that's helpful. Carrie has her hand up.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I think it got buried. Kind of along the same lines we've been talking about. Lee talked about, having the life planning as well. So I know in Molly's Substack it shows like how long someone should plan to be preparing something. So just putting due dates is one thing, but setting expectations on, hey, especially like strategic plans and things like that you're doing for the next year, it's going to take 3 or 4 weeks. You got to work with your department. There's a lot of mini steps in there. So beyond Molly's Substack that shows like weekly, is there anything else that you've seen or people are using for showing like expectations of time that people need to spend?
I don't think I've seen much else. I think it's usually like you can supplement because the rhythm of business is like a big document that will have a lot of things. Again, it just depends on how much you have, but usually then it'll be like a specific memo or document around the quarterly business review or OKRs. And so you then communicate there, hey, like this is what we're asking of you. Especially, actually, I'll jump to a even people team example, like performance reviews, like doing your own evaluation of yourself, and then you get peer reviews, etc. I've seen people teams say like your own performance review should take no more than a half hour. Oftentimes people spend a lot longer than that, but they do set expectations of that and like, make sure you're getting no more than 3 peer reviews. And ideally this whole process for you prepping for your own performance only takes 3 hours, right? Like something like that. And so I don't know if there's I'm not sure about a tool necessarily, but I think like as you get into those big milestones and activities, like doing that double take and deep diving on what the expectation of time is for each initiative. And then it becomes kind of like especially a new process, it takes time for people to get set in it. But once you've done a performance review, you're like, okay, now this is my 5th time doing this. I get it. Or this is my, 3rd time doing an OKR. I understand what's expected of me.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that.
I like for QBRs, typically I'm putting the template together, we tweak it every quarter. So it's basically, the understanding is when I send out the template, I give them like 3 or 4 weeks for getting the information back to me with OKRs and all of the information. But still, I just, sometimes it surprises people. They're like, oh, I hadn't budgeted time for this. So yeah, I'm struggling with that at our org.
Yeah. Clara, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna go back to your example about, blocking the time, right, for people, because I think like people often think of this as an additional thing that they need to do on top of their job, but this really is part of the job description. And then the other thing that I was going to mention was like, this is probably going to show what side of the internet I'm on, but like instead of doing girl math, you need to be doing chief of staff math, where you're like, okay, for every hour that somebody spends filling out this form, like how much quote, quote, money are we spending, right? Like how much money are we spending when we get all of the leadership in one room and doing this kind of thing? And so, trying to kind of, it's not going to be perfect math, of course, but apportion out like how much time that it's going to go into each of these things. And you could present that to those leaders, because leaders tend to like be a little bit more quantitative, right? They want to see like, if I put in this amount of work, like this is what it's going to amount to. And if you're able to kind of like use that logic and appeal to them, you could probably get a little better results in terms of like actually getting people to fill things out in a timely manner.
Love that. Thank you, Clara.
I just wanted to add one quick little tip for everyone. I think that'll help too, is it's okay to, have fun or like make it more enjoyable too. I think that's we talk a lot about the business side of things, but I know some of the most successful companies I've been at always kind of added that component onto it. So for example, like when I was working with Annie's, their quarterly reviews started with milk and cookie parties, right? Or coffee and cookie parties, right? And then everybody got to try all the new products that were coming out for the quarter or the year, right? So there are things you could like ring. It was barbecues, and then like I can tell you stories about like one time Jamie brought a tank in. So but there's always some kind of components of fun too, and you know, these are things you have to do, but nobody says that they have to be just all business, right? So I think part of that thing we mentioned earlier, both on culture and on, like, you know, keeping people in motivated and keeping and kind of aligning with their rhythm of businesses, is like, if they are looking forward to it in some way, you know, maybe they're handing out awards or something. Those are all things that are going to help.
Yeah, it's like a superlative for like rhythm of business star, you know, like like just I love that. I love adding in fun. And I also think, you know, we talked about types of culture, but also just like culture building activities should also be a big part of rhythm of business. And not just like you know, the annual reviews and performance, you know, and OKRs and such. So awesome. Well, I know we're at time and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. And Clara, it was wonderful to be here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Aarti, everyone. Please, a huge round of applause. This was a really excellent discussion and just a taste. So 2 follow-ups for this topic in particular. Next Monday, we're going to be having a facilitated discussion around strategic planning. So bring all of these questions and more. I think we are filled up, but if we get, you know, 20 people who are interested, we'll do another session later that week or the week after. And then in mid-October, we're bringing in Josephine, who was Chief of Staff over at Uber, to talk more about, you know, strategic annual planning and things like that. As we're heading into Q4, we're thinking about headcount, you know, for the next year, budgeting, strategic planning, and all of this. So just keep an eye out for more resources and more workshops around these topics. And then Aarti is also in our Slack, so don't hesitate to reach out. She's here to be your second brain if you want a little bit more one-on-one time to chat about your chief of staff role, not just this, but obviously all of the different things that she's done in her chief of staff career. And so I hope to see you all at the next workshop. So hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week. And if you are starting to go into mooncake season, let me know what your favorite mooncake flavors are. Now we're coming up on the Mid-Autumn Festival. So see you all at the next one. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.